Welcome back to Dear Future, where we dive into the minds of artists who venture into uncharted territories of technology. I am Suki, your host, and we are going to be exploring yet another captivating world of a new artist's imagination. Today, we're stepping into the peculiar yet mesmerizing universe of Zack London, also known as Gossip Goblin. He's a writer and illustrator whose specialty lies in the oft-overlooked world of goblin art and lore, using AI in very unique ways. Through goblins and generative stories, Zack brings a unique perspective on the natural history of our planet, so says his website, from prehistoric landscapes alive with dinosaurs to a future where we exist as virtual minds, and even to the universe's final chapter. I think it's a place where the mundane meets the monumental with a hint of humor, and Zack was also one of the first artists I found on Instagram telling very fun stories with a variety of tools, and in a way that I think was unexpected for me. Together, we will delve into Zack's creative process, his blend of physical and digital artistry, and why goblins of all creatures might hold the key to understanding our own existence.
This idea that everything's been done before can be challenged.
I've been dreaming of a computer like this my whole life.
It really made me think more about how our brains work.
It's not coming from anywhere else. It's only coming from us.
Dear Future.
Zack, welcome to Dear Future.
Thank you for having me. I was curious what my intro would sound like.
How did we do? Did I use oft overlooked in a cohesive way that made sense with your universe?
I guess so. I don't know. I'd never thought about it that much. You have to write a bio and then you just don't change it.
And forever it lives on the internet as a relic of your existence. I want to know, before we get into all of the art and the mythology and your process, I want to know, why did you pick this creature of all creatures?
I don't know. It's the internet. You have to commit to something and then you're just stuck with it forever. So when I was making Instagram like 8 years ago, most of the names I wanted were taken. I was just wrote Gossip Goblin, wasn't taken, and here we are. So I think Goblin's just a placeholder. It's just like a filler word for creatures,
And what drew you to these creatures? I've seen a bit of your illustrations and the work that you do. How did you get into this more mythological space?
Probably the most linear answer is that I think all young boys, at least in the early 90s, had a choice. When you're like 4, you get to decide one tech tree that you build on. It's like dinosaurs, construction equipment, planes / military stuff, trains, which no one wants to be that. That's by far the worst choice, obviously. You're destined for just a sad life ahead.
Tragedy.
Or like balls, like sports stuff. And I picked the dinosaur track.
Got it.
And that translated into my parents being very supportive of that. And obviously they weren't able to get me living dinosaurs, but we always had tons of reptiles in the house. So they kind of fed that interest. So we had like reptiles of all sorts, like giant tortoises, ambiguous if you can legally own them in California, but we had a bunch.
Love the gray area.
Like chameleons and like monitor lizards and pythons and all sorts of stuff. So I guess in some subliminal way, that's probably like the origin of creature arts. Like I look at my earliest like childhood drawings and it's just dinosaurs and lizards and an 8-year-old's version of like those early British naturalist illustrations. And then it just didn't go away. I kind of drew the same content until I went off to college and got a slightly more formal education. I majored in sculpture, so not quite illustration, but kind of continued that theme. And yeah, it just kind of pervaded, I guess, my craft ever since.
And what made you decide that the world of not caretaking reptilian creatures, but actually drawing them, representing them, and being in the visual arts was going to be your path?
Yeah, I majored in sculpture and anthropology, very lucrative double major, with the assumption like I'd figured out I'd go to law school or something because I just wasn't exposed to like what can you do with those degrees. And I put it all behind me. And then I got a Fulbright to go to Malaysia for a year, and I turned that into like a 2-year stint in living in India and Nepal and then Malaysia. And I think that was good because if nothing else, showed me that there's more to the world than getting a law degree.
Shocker.
And then as one does with very little direction in what you want to do with life, you move to San Francisco. And that was good timing because it felt, this is like 2013, that there were millions of job opportunities with very ambiguous requirements or skill sets. So I had written my anthropology thesis about Second Life and doing kind of a little anthology of weird communities in Second Life. It's a whole tangent to get into. But through like a weird cosmic series of events, I ended up befriending this guy who lived on a boat in Emeryville Marina who had a AI startup with virtual conversational avatars. And I had no real skills to lend him except I could animate. And this is early days where we were still designing UI in Photoshop and there weren't easy practical ways to animate proof of concepts. So I kind of got my foot in the door there and then ended up becoming a UX product designer, spent 10 years working at design agencies and SF. Then I was at Oculus for a while doing VR experiences. And now I am a creative technologist in Stockholm. So it's not like I only draw goblins. There's other things I'm doing.
So as a creative technologist, it sounds like you moved from this world of representing abstract concepts into taking those and animating them digitally in these very digital, very tech-forward spaces. And now in this work that you're doing as a creative technologist, are you blending those things? What do you feel like your craft is? Is it kind of representing characters and bringing them to life? Or is it more exploring the tools themselves and seeing what creativity you can glean from them?
I don't want to offend product designers, but I guess because I've kind of been in the agency world for most of my life, you're never really very good at anything. But there is a strength to being mega generalist. And when I mean like mega generalist, I mean it in like whatever. There's people who are a million times more experienced than I am. But I feel like I had a very, very hands-on 10-year rodeo in San Francisco at a pretty prominent agency. So every little mini 2-year tech revolution of the 2010s, I was there for, from like when everyone said IoT is the next big thing to like, oh my God, food robotics to Web3 to AI to whatever. Every little paradigm as working in an agency, it was kind of like, all right, well, the VC money is clearly rolling into, whatever, the scooter economy, the fucking robot barista economy, the drone economy, the augmented reality, and it was like, okay, so now you work really deeply on what's the future of like micro mobility, what's the future of like, how do you interact with the robot barista? So it's like, you go really, really deep, but not for long enough to really develop any expertise. And it's like, boom, fuck it. Who cares about food robots? All right, let's talk about drones now because, whatever. They miniaturized the battery somewhere in Shenzhen and now everyone wants to talk about drones. So it was a lot of just like, you get exposure and like living in the Bay, you have friends who do the corporate route from the beginning and it's super lucrative and you can't blame them for it. But you have like deep specialization, it's like someone who's just been working 1,000 miles underground at Dropbox for 8 years. And it's like, that's a very, very precise level of knowledge on one thing. I couldn't do it, but bless them. But I think instead it's like, okay, so I don't really know how to do anything that well, but I have exposure to more things than most people, albeit I'm not really good at any of them. But again, it does make you kind of agile in a way where it's easy to pick things up really quickly and fuck around and get to like a cursory level of knowledge to mess around with it. And so I think I wouldn't say I'm great at anything, but luckily there is no learning curve to this new wave of AI tools. Anyone who says otherwise is trying to make themselves look good.
Well, so tell me how you first discovered that when you confronted it, as you've been privy to so many different waves of the technological fads coming and going, and maybe avoiding getting stuck into one particular product 50 miles down. But when this wave of AI first started to reach the shores, where were you? What were you doing? And what did you think when you started playing with it?
I think I was fucking around early on with a lot of tools and I was super excited about it. But again, I don't know when we can say Gen AI started. Like it's been around forever. Maybe it's been around for 2 years. Whatever arbitrary threshold we set for like, this is when generative visual AI hit the mark where it was like worth paying attention to. So I think during the very prolonged meme era, there was like cool because it was glitchy. And there was definitely a subset of like, do you know the acronym TPOT? That part of Twitter? Any conceivable niche or interest, there's some really insular, hostile, closed off group on Twitter or Reddit that discards it. But I also look at them with jealousy. Like I wish I was, in their club.
Yeah, we all search for belonging, even if we don't want it.
Yeah. But no one sent me an invite.
Me either. I really hated that nobody sent me like a nice card being like, would you like to join our club? Instead, everyone's walled off their gardens very, very intensely.
I have a real chip on my shoulder. I'm not in, no one's invited me to any of these little fucking cliques. I feel like everyone else gets the megaphone all the time but me. But it's fine. I can build my own little goblin army in the corner.
Oh, it's going to be great. The uprising will be truly vicious.
It's happening. People can ignore it, but I've coming up on 700,000 followers, and they're vicious as well. So
I bet.
Yeah. I guess that was a bit of a tangent, but I feel like probably 2.5 years ago was when I thought, okay, we're kind of approaching the level of fidelity where like, this seems exciting. And I remember there was one day at work where I was fucking around with Dolly and it was really good at making shoes, like crazy shoe prompts. And I just thought it was so exciting. And a lot of my coworkers just shrugged it off, and a few thought it was really fun. And we had our own little clique, actually. So I was lying. I do have a clique. They're not on the internet, though. They're like humble Europeans that they don't want to like conquer the world, or conquer Twitter at least. So then with a few friends, was just messing around with stuff and following it closely. Midjourney came along, and that was cool. And that, I think, is kind of when I started playing around a lot more with like, well, what can you do now if you can create any piece of media instantaneously? I have a lot of artist friends who were really disheartened because what does it mean if you're a craft? Like personally, my illustration work is heinously time consuming, 150 hours for a drawing, and more than 150 hours. It's like a lifetime to get to that style and skill set to then execute that. And now there's no learning curve. You can be functionally illiterate. I mean, you could smash your hand on the keyboard and Midjourney will shoot out a beautiful prompt. And, in the attention economy, like no one gives a fuck about your process. It's like, hot girl, or like, look, robot, mint it. And so in that sense, I was a bit like, okay, I have no problem with AI art, but I also think that it's a conversation that's a little bit tricky. And I've had it so many times that I'm not interested in debating it. But like, yes, no one is really an AI artist. Like, you were an artist already that uses AI. The end result is not really yours, at least when we're talking about imagery. You are more like a curator or some kind of operator. But yeah, I had a little bit of trouble reconciling like, okay, so should I just stop drawing? Because I don't have a lot of time and pretty sure it's pointless to draw anymore. But then it was like, okay, but there's so many cool new things you can do. So I did this short kind of photo essay series, kind of Nat Geo, like a little offensive, 80s travel writing, a little Orientalist, but within reason. I think it was tasteful. And it was about this place called Urumqi, which is this kind of Soviet satellite state in the Altai Mountains, so like on the outer edges of Mongolia. And it was this photo essay where I would write these short little articles about different rituals and stuff. And I kept it all fairly believable, like nothing is crazy. And I think with AI, everyone drifts to the extreme. It's like cyberpunk dystopian goddess, like, it's like everything is Michael Bay caps lock hyper polished. And this got a lot of traction because it wasn't so extreme. It was just like, not to pat myself on the back, but like, just because AI is a superpower doesn't mean you have to go fucking balls out and like everything has to be super sexy supermodel. She's half cyborg in Neo Tokyo, and like her boyfriend is like a lion robot kind of shit, which I feel is like pretty much AI in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Which is why
it's just maximalism at all times.
Yeah. Just to get to the end, I think AI should be banned across the board. After what I see on Instagram and Twitter, it was a big mistake. It was a mistake. I mean, I can only benefit from its existence, but I'm willing to
pull the plug. Yeah, that's good.
Experiments over it.
In some ways, you also were one of the first people to really tell these very dynamic stories. I think the first one that I saw of yours was like a garden gnome talking. And it was very captivating because I think you were the first to really use maybe some lip syncing, or you were thinking about it in really more expansive ways. I want to know a little bit more about those experiments.
I'm happy to talk about that. Yeah, so I was doing that first, and then I was like, all right, well, whatever. It's just images. I have other things to do. And then when Runway first came out and it was only text to video, I remember I made a video that I thought was really cool, and I showed it to a bunch of people and they didn't seem to get it. And people who I think fixate a little bit too much on the details. And I was like, yeah, but whatever, it's going to get better. But point being, like, it's fucking nuts that this exists now. Like, you guys are too jaded. And I kind of stuck with it. And I remember this is like a year and a half ago, maybe. I spent a while experimenting with like different movie types and like trying to figure out like, what is this conducive to? Because everything is very hazy. And I don't just mean technically. I guess, to use the analogy, with my art, I'm very like precision oriented. Like, I'm all about control and precision. And I really, really don't like when like you do not have control over the medium. And obviously, like, there are many artists who are the kind of the opposite. We're like, no, the medium is part of the process. And I reject that. I want to have creative agency over the full process. I don't want to relinquish the end result because whatever. And that's why kind of hard to do that when you work with clay. But with AI, it was very similar, where it was like, this is really frustrating because you have a vision and it's very, very hard to get it to do what you want. And a lot of artists, I think, were very successful early on in just relinquishing control. And obviously it spawned this whole genre of like weird glitchiness where people actually celebrate the fucking body horror and like the cursed imagery. And the weirdness of it. Good for them. I'm happy for them. There's certainly an audience for that. And it is probably the fastest way to grow an audience on TikTok is just to glitch, body horror, people melting and stuff. But to me, it was like, okay, but this is, again, fixating on technology from the other end, which is like, yes, let's push this a bit farther. Yes, it's cool. There's a new vernacular that's created because AI has created all of these new visual metaphors that like didn't exist totally unintentionally. But I'm kind of like, all glitch art's the same. You can't really put your name on it. But then I think Runway was getting incrementally better. And then it kind of hit me one day where I'm like, we're really almost at the point where you can tell a story like this. And so, yeah, I made this video of this gnome walking through a forest and he finds a truffle and he kind of waxes poetic about it's beautiful and it's like bustling with life. And then he like yanks it out of the ground and puts it in a stew. It's this short little 30-second thing. And it didn't take long to make, but now this is the most copy-paste work stream there is. But it wasn't intuitive then, but like this is how you would string these tools together. And I'm not going to say I was the first, but I would certainly say prove me wrong. I think I was, but among the first to start doing these narrative bits where it's like you can tell a story, you just have to accept that like you want to have full control and you have to try your best. And I think it's less about just saying YOLO, whatever. The gnome, if he shifts into a tree, I push that out. You got to show AI who's boss. You got to pull the reins a bit. Rocco's basilisk aside, you do have to be pushy with it and throw it around. But it's more like you have to have a story, and how you actually execute that is going to be a lot of back and forth. And it does actually trigger new storytelling techniques like the cinematography and how you show it. And it's like, all right, well, it is fucking impossible to show someone running. So like maybe there's a more creative way to visualize that. But now the narrative doesn't quite align with what you're showing. So you kind of rewrite the script and morph it back. And you end up having this dynamic back and forth where you have to make these concessions because AI is limited in some ways, but then it opens up new territories because, it's really good at whatever the style. And then you end up with, I think, this very cool new form of storytelling. And basically, I made that video September 5th of like 2023. And I've basically done a video a day ever since with the same guy. So if you were to add all the videos, it's like 3.5 hours maybe. It's not a linear story. It's episodic. And then you'll get like 20-part episodes. And then you'll have a return to the old style. Some are very deep and somber, and some are just ridiculous. Now I'm on this one that's been going for like 2 months. It's a very elaborate story. I feel bad for anyone who's just tuning in because it's impossible to know the lore at this point. It's so deep, and I lose my temper sometimes because people show up and like, "What's the gnome doing?" I'm like, "Bro, what the fuck? Study the lore." You can't. This is like tuning in to like the second to last episode of Game of Thrones and being like, "Who's that lady?" It's like, what the fuck is wrong with you, man? Scroll back, like, start from the beginning. But so it's been going on for a long time, and it's been fun. And obviously the tools have evolved so drastically that it's kind of crazy. And in a way, I think my work maybe suffers a bit because I'm so caught up in actually executing on this incredibly long story that I don't think there's anyone who's done anything similar. And in many ways, if I could have channeled that time into like, maybe let's go for quality here and let's like pause and think about how we can do something more well made. But I'm kind of too deep now. You just got to run with it. So
I want to get to the lore afterwards because I think that's a huge part of what I found fascinating about your work. And also, I definitely have not followed in the recent lore. I tuned in early and then I was like, I need hours for this. But I also recognize that what is challenging about AI is that as somebody who, I studied documentary filmmaking, and a lot of it is really like, how can you piece together the story from the collage of moments that you're gathering in someone's life? And so oftentimes editing with AI can feel a lot like doc editing because you're just really stringing together moments and hoping that it's not a montage, and you're trying to figure out how to build a scene out of moments that are sometimes very disparate in time and space. It's like a limitation and a challenge that is forever going to haunt me. But I'm curious for you, you were talking about how the early process was not intuitive, and yet you found a way to string together these different technologies so that you could get a story out of it. I want you to tell me a little bit about what that process was and then what the process is now.
I guess early on, the workflow was you just generate a fuckload of images in Midjourney. So I would write a script, and basically, just for a little bit of preface, all of my illustration work since forever has usually had a short story attached to it. And then during COVID, I self-published a book of short stories and illustrations. And the book is called The Gossip of Goblins, for the record. I'd say the stories they're not meant to be funny, but they kind of are. But they're not pretentious either. It's more just weird historical vignettes. I already had a habit of writing these short stories very quickly, where it's like, you just jump into telling it. It doesn't have to be the best. You just go for it and pare it down later. And one of the unique challenges, obviously, with AI was okay, but when you're writing the story, you have to tailor it to what's possible. You can't show a lot of these scenes. So you actually have to kind of in the back of your head write something that you know is technically possible to visualize. And obviously, you mess around with Midjourney or whatever tool you use long enough, and you start to intrinsically understand the limitations and write a story accordingly. And then, I, for instance, would give ChatGPT basically like a 200-page document of all my short stories and be like, you understand my writing style now. Here's an outline of a script. Can you turn this outline into 75 words, which translates to 30 seconds, which is how long a video should be. And then, AI spits out something that's like a very weird caricatured version of what you wrote. Like it doesn't feel like you, but it's much easier to edit the scaffolding of that. And then so it's a back and forth. So sometimes I write everything start to finish. Sometimes I write outlines, ask ChatGPT or Claude to emulate me, and then I go back and cut it out. Sometimes it triggers a new idea, but there's that iterative process. And then it was really a matter of just churning out tons of images in Midjourney. And of course, there was no character reference back then. So how do you get the same character more than once ever? Well, turns out that a old man with a white beard and a red gnome hat and a blue cloak, they all look the same. Not to be racist, but all gnomes look the same.
Gnomes would beg to differ.
Well, the gnomes that I'm interested in showing, Fred Vog, they all look the same. He looks close enough seeing the scene that it doesn't derail everything where you're like, wait, who the fuck is that? But then obviously like tons of things are weirdly hard to do. So yeah, you had to just get a ton of images and then hope that half of them might vaguely animate in a way that doesn't distract from everything. And then it was, just basically creating a voiceover with 11 labs, animating a fuckload of clips, and then trying to string it all together. Like you said, cherry picking the things the visuals that roughly correspond. And then as you do it more and more, you get a kind of a feel for what works. And then with every subsequent Midjourney release or every 11 labs release or every runway release, things get better and you can open up your storytelling process. And then, for instance, the narratives that always had to be fairly contained can start to expand and be a little bit more elaborate because you are able to visualize wilder things. And then it's like, okay, well, that kind of steers your storytelling in a new direction. And then I think because I've been doing this all so fast, I'm not really that sentimental about each video. When you're churning out one a day, then the algorithm really starts to dictate what you're doing too, which I've read articles about, which is like this feedback loop that artists create for the algorithm. And then it's like, ultimately, whatever, we enter this crazy feedback loop where like, who the hell is in charge anymore? If I made all my content just to please the algorithm, my content would be hot girls and body horror.
And robots. Don't forget robots.
And robots. And those morphing videos where it's like,
oh, yeah.
It's like this weird Brazilian audio of a guy yelling he's back. And it shows like a rhino morphing with a tank. Guaranteed 100 million views first 24 hours. I'm going to give that tip away for free to your audience.
Oh, my God.
But there's cheat codes here. But it's more like, what are people interested in? Because I can take this in so many ways and this can get so weird so quickly. So it's kind of like to keep me in check and to kind of help the narrative grow. It's like, okay, people respond well to these kinds of stories. No, this was too dark, or this is a little bit too sentimental. And then me iterating with the algorithm, aka like other humans giving feedback / with the AI. So it's just been this kind of co-evolution that's been happening. And now it's kind of at a point where I feel, feels like 10 years, but it's been a year and a half. And the tools that we have now are insane. And effectively you can do anything if you want to commit the time to it.
And now that you've been through the gauntlet of not knowing how to think about using the tools to now you're at the top of the mountain, making content for all of the people, throwing it down like paper to the wind and saying, here is your content. Now, what is exciting to you? Is it the lore that keeps you connected to the story? Is it the expanding your storytelling abilities?
Good question. I don't know. Maybe it's just neuroses or something. Just obsessive. It's certainly not the fans because they're... Gotta be honest. I hope they're not listening to this, but I don't like them. I do. I like the old school, the real followers of the lore. But the new cohort, they're cooked.
The youths, the youngins, the hooligans.
It's over for them. I guess it's a mix of everything. It's exciting. And I don't mean that. I really it's so fun because I don't want to keep fixating on the audience, whatever. It's just who gives a fuck how many followers you have. There's a very fucking large, responsive, interactive community. And it's very fun that you've created this little world that other people are happy to go along for the ride. And I really like that. And you have a sense of ownership over this very expansive universe you've created. And it's very different. I mean, yeah, there's weird parasocial relationships that form from it, but it's very fun to tell a story that people are on it. And I don't want to get into the lore because that could just take years to cover. But it's so funny. We're like, whatever. The Fred Vog is this gnome character. And we basically just watched like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes of just him doing every conceivable thing. Effectively no scenario that Fred Vog hasn't somehow been implicated in. And finally, like now we're on this almost like 40, 50, 60 episode saga where this is Tea Party of the Gods. And this is like a special. It's like a 3-minute episode. And the gods are all too polite to take the last crumpet. And it evolves into this Ragnarok and all the gods vanish. And this is the smoldering crater. And then we see that for 5,000 years, humanity did fine without the gods. And then, though, the demons of our world started to emerge in 1923, to be precise. And then now it's like there was basically a month of these kind of 1920s style, like quick War of the Worlds news bulletins of different monsters coming to different cities. And all of them went super viral because people are nationalistic. So they're like, you make a video about Mexico, it explodes. People love that. You do one about Stockholm, it does fine. Swedes are kind of, it's hard to run out of that. You do one about India, holy shit, that's going to explode. And then it turns out that like, okay, so Fred Vog, this gnome character, rallies all these gnomes. There's this epic battle that was only made possible because of Hailuo, which I don't want to get into talk too much about tools, but Hailuo clearly, legally, Greywater, clearly trained on a lot of things that they shouldn't have trained it on. Every unethical thing you can train a video tool to do, it does. But it does enable crazy action scenes. So then it's like, okay, we can literally just have like a fucking Lord of the Rings style battle of gnomes versus these giant djinns in the battle, in this, the great battle of Mesopotamia. And then the main character dies. You've been watching him for a year, he just gets shot in the fucking chest with an arrow. It's over. Or is it? So the next episode, Fred Vog goes to purgatory, and he's just wandering purgatory. It's a very sad, sullen episode. At this point, not using music from Instagram anymore, but Suno and Udio, you can create insane soundtracks. And I feel bad because my girlfriend, I was having her create music. She was very excited to create music, and I told her she was fired. She's not fast enough. But
horrific.
Each episode can have like a crazy score and feel really cinematic or like very, very weird, like kind of Brian Eno purgatory ambient. And then anyways, Fred Vog meets this fruit fly. He doesn't step on it, even though he could have. And it turns out that it was the god of all gods, this like Yeti creature in disguise. And I'm going to stop right there and say that was a reference to a video that I made like 11 months ago where Fred Vog is in a garden and he meets this fruit fly that only lives for a day. And it's then the fly says like, don't pity me. And it talks about like how he experienced a full lifetime in a day of like finding love and watching sunset and drinking nectar, and then he dies at the end because they live for a day. It was the same fruit fly that ended up being the god of gods 9 months later. I didn't even know that because I totally fucking forgot that episode ever happened. However, like dozens of people were like, oh my god, and like leaking the video to me. And it was like, okay, it's like you have all of these little internet scholars who are just like carefully combing the lore, like, oh, sir, actually in episode 212, that was actually foreshadowing of Apex, the god of gods. And it was like, this is great. This is what it's all about. The lore masters, it's like some 16-year-old Finnish kid who has like this encyclopedic knowledge of every fucking animal that crossed paths with Fred Vog and like catches me sometimes. They're like, that's impossible. On Tuesdays, he has a werewolf over for stew. And it's like, that's true. That's true. I did say every Tuesday. They catch me in my own lies. So I know that you had people on the show, and I know there's AI creators who are doing things on the fucking Sphere and Super Bowl and whatever, but that's commercial. And I guess you asked why I do this. And for me, it's because like this allows you to create like a universe from your own imagination, put it out there, and like it's received. It is not to sell a product. It's not to, celebrate a rapper or a washed out kind of, those are like dream projects. But in a way, when I give myself an honest reflection, I'm like, yeah, well, this is really what I want to do though. And obviously there are other echelons to strive for. Like there are ways to commercialize it or to go bigger or to be like, okay, you know what? Like I want to have a Kanye West music video in the next 12 months kind of thing. Couldn't even do if I wanted. But either way, I think realistically at the end of the day, like I really enjoy that you can just go wild creating this universe and it just lives there and other people are actually receiving it and like following it. And it's just kind of amazing and unfiltered. And I don't think no matter what level of creative agency you had, even at like a George Lucas level, previously the amount of filters between your idea and the end product is so vast and the teams are so vast and the hundreds of, if not many thousands of people who are in VFX and set design and script writing and blah, blah, blah till the very end. I just don't think that there's ever been a moment in history where there's basically such an unfiltered mode of telling these like very vivid stories and to the world and being able to kind of get instant feedback and engagement and kind of build that loop.
That's so beautiful because it's such a reflection of also the world that we live in, which is essentially creating a very niche and specified community that is like a very deep audience. You know, like you have built a crowd of people who are listening to and captivated by the stories that you are telling. And I would say that when you're looking at that level of dedication and commitment to the story and the lore, I mean, I would say that there are many screenwriters that I know who have been chasing being able to tell a story that could captivate, you know, a group of people in a room just to get a chance to be in a writer's room, you know. And I think what is so beautiful about your path is that you have taken your own way to arrive at a place that so many aspire to do, but do it through very conventional means. And this is an opportunity that people don't have to go through those same well-trod paths. And actually you can get a shortcut in a very specific, unique way that's very true to you.
Yeah, totally.
I have one last question, which is, what would you want to say or ask as a time capsule message for the future, starting with Dear Future?
I'm sorry and good luck, I think is what I'd say. I don't know. I think the future, I am optimistic. I think, well, there's reasons to think that things are going to be very, 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 very bad. On the flip side, could be great. So may you live in interesting times. That's what I will tell them.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate the time. Thank you for all of our listeners for joining us on this journey through lore and just a history of very unexpected experiences leading to a world where Finnish teenagers are sliding into your DMs and reminding you of what world you built last Tuesday. Zack, it's been really lovely to explore your perspective on life's mysteries and to see how these creatures have become a bridge between your imagination and other humans in other parts of the world. Thank you to Echo Bend for always helping produce and put these episodes together. Thank you to our listeners. If you're inspired to dig deeper into the realms of myth and wonder and the unexpected, please, please, please follow Gossip Goblin and stay tuned for more stories that stretch beyond boundaries of creativity. Please keep questioning, keep creating. This is Dear Future, signing off.
Dear Future.